The morning of June 21st, 1995, the air inside Netscape Communications' offices in Mountain View, California, wasn't charged with the usual euphoria of a Silicon Valley startup, but with a dense, premonitory tension. In a conference room, a contingent of executives from Microsoft, the most powerful software company on the planet, sat across from Netscape's founders, Marc Andreessen and Jim Clark, alongside their CEO, Jim Barksdale. What transpired over the next 4 hours wasn't a standard business negotiation. It was, according to later testimony and Andreessen's contemporary notes, a scene pulled directly from gangster cinema. Microsoft's emissaries didn't bring flowers. They brought a market division proposal that, beneath the surface of technical collaboration, concealed an existential ultimatum. The offer was chilling in its simplicity. Microsoft would take absolute control of the browser market for the imminent Windows 95 operating system, leaving Netscape the scraps of legacy, systems like Windows 3.1, Mac, and Unix. If Netscape accepted, they would become an irrelevant vassal. If they refused, Microsoft would use its monopoly to crush them. Andreessen, with his characteristic bluntness, would later describe this encounter as a visit from Don Corleone, confessing he expected to find a bloody horsehead in his bed the next morning. This event, the inciting incident in the dramatic structure of this story, marked the official beginning of the browser wars. This wasn't simply a corporate dispute over market share, it was an ideological and technical battle for the very soul of the nascent digital economy. On one side stood the walled garden model and proprietary software defended by the Redmond Empire. On the other, the chaotic but open promise of the World Wide Web. We will dissect the anatomy of this war, revealing how obscure technical decisions like the implementation of ActiveX or the secret Project Blackbird nearly fractured the internet into incompatible fiefdoms. We will analyze the corporate villain not as a caricature, but as a rational entity driven by existential paranoia. Bill Gates' fear that the browser would reduce Windows to a set of poorly debugged device drivers. Through exhaustive analysis of thousands of pages of Department of Justice documents, leaked internal emails, and sworn testimony, we will reconstruct how Microsoft deployed an embrace, extend, and extinguish strategy to suffocate Netscape, and how, in a final twist worthy of the third act of a Greek tragedy, Netscape's destruction planted the seeds of open source code that would save the web a decade later. Chapter 1. The Internet Tidal Wave. To understand the ferocity of Microsoft's response, we must first comprehend its position in 1995. Microsoft wasn't simply a large company, it was the de facto standard of personal computing. With Windows installed on more than 90% of the world's personal computers, the company enjoyed profit margins and cash. Reserves that rivaled sovereign nations. However, within the Redmond campus, often referred to by competitors and detractors as the Death Star, the culture wasn't one of complacency, but of institutionalized paranoia. Bill Gates had built the company on the premise that in technology, success is ephemeral. History was littered with the corpses of giants like IBM in hardware or Lotus in spreadsheets, companies that had lost their relevance by failing to detect the next paradigm shift. In this ecosystem, employees worked grueling hours, driven by ruthless meritocracy and the vision of a computer on every desk and in every home. But there was a massive blind spot on their radar: the internet. Until the mid-90s, Microsoft viewed connectivity as a feature to be controlled and monetized through proprietary services like the Microsoft Network, similar to AOL or CompuServe. The idea of an open, decentralized, non-proprietary network was anathema to their business model. In contrast, across Silicon Valley, Netscape Communications represented the archetype of the new economy. Founded in April 1994 by Jim Clark, founder of Silicon Graphics, and Marc Andreessen, creator of Mosaic, the company moved at breakneck speed. Their culture, defined by Netscape time, dictated that a normal year of development should be compressed into a month. Netscape's offices were famous for their atmosphere of college fraternity mixed with high-tech laboratory. Engineers, many recruited directly from the University of Illinois, survived on pizza and soft drinks, working through all-nighters to launch new versions of the Navigator browser. While Microsoft was hierarchical and methodical, Netscape was chaotic and fast. Netscape's product, Navigator, wasn't just software, it was a window to a new world. In 1994 and early 1995, if you wanted to access the World Wide Web, you used Netscape. Their market share exceeded 80% even before Microsoft launched Windows 95. For users, Netscape was the internet. And for Mark Andreessen, the browser had the potential to become something more, a cloud-based operating system that would make the underlying hardware irrelevant. The browser will reduce Windows to a mundane set of poorly debugged device drivers, a quote attributed to Mark Andreessen. This phrase, repeated in the press and in Redmond's hallways, was the declaration of war. Andreessen didn't just want to compete, he wanted to obsolete Microsoft's most valuable asset. Microsoft's complacency shattered abruptly in May 1995. Ben Slivka, a visionary engineer within Microsoft, wrote a crucial memo titled "The Web is the Next Platform," warning that the web had the potential to surpass Windows as an application development and platform. Bill Gates, after digesting this information and observing Netscape's exponential growth, wrote his own response on May 26, 1995, the famous internet tidal wave memo. In this document, Gates reoriented the entire company's strategy with military urgency. The internet is the most important single development to come along since the IBM PC was introduced in 1981, Gates wrote. A new competitor born on the internet is Netscape. Their browser is dominant, we have to match and beat their offerings. The memo not only acknowledged the strategic error of having ignored the web, but identified Netscape as the target to be taken down. Gates understood that if Netscape managed to establish its browser and the Java language as the standard for software development, Windows' monopoly over APIs, control of the platform, was at stake. Before the embrace and extend strategy took full shape, Microsoft attempted a bold maneuver to redefine the internet under its own terms. This effort was codified under the name Project Blackbird. Blackbird is fundamental to understanding Microsoft's mentality in 1995. The vision was to create a visually rich online experience, similar to a multimedia CD-ROM, that would surpass the static capabilities of the era's HTML. The danger of Blackbird lay in its seduction. It promised publishers and content creators superior design tools, drag and drop, complex typography that the primitive HTML of 1995 couldn't match. If Microsoft had managed to convince major media and companies to adopt Blackbird, the internet would have become an extension of MSN, accessible only through Windows. However, Blackbird failed for two critical reasons. First, technical complexity. The software was heavy, resource-intensive, and difficult to scale on the limited bandwidth infrastructure of the time. Second, and more importantly, the tide of HTML was unstoppable. The ease with which anyone could create a web page in HTML surpassed the entry barriers of Blackbird's closed ecosystem. Microsoft had cancelled a project and pivot, repackaging some of its tools into Visual Interdev, but the intention to control standards persisted. While Microsoft reorganized its ranks, Netscape executed a financial maneuver that would validate the new economy. On August 9, 1995, barely a year and a half after its founding, Netscape went public. Morgan Stanley bankers had set the stock price at $28, already an ambitious figure for a company without profits. But pent-up demand and the narrative that Netscape was the next Microsoft created a perfect storm. When the market opened, shares immediately jumped to $71, reaching a peak of $74.75. By the close of the first day at $58.25, the company was valued at approximately $2.9 billion. Jim Clark became an instant billionaire worth $566 million. Mark Andreessen, at 24 years old, was worth $59 million. This financial success didn't just enrich its founders, it put a giant target on the company's back. It validated the business model of free software for the end consumer, financed by enterprise services, and demonstrated to Wall Street that the internet was the next frontier of capital. For Microsoft, Netscape's valuation was final confirmation that their dominance was under real threat. They couldn't allow a company with such market capitalization to challenge their hegemony. With the failure of the June 1995 market division proposal, Microsoft moved to a strategy of total annihilation. Paul Maritz, Microsoft's vice president, allegedly declared in a meeting with Intel executives, "We're going to cut off their air supply. Everything they're selling, we're going to give away for free." This predatory pricing strategy leveraged the unique structure of the software market. The marginal cost of producing an additional copy of Internet Explorer was essentially zero. Since Microsoft had nearly infinite cash reserves thanks to Windows and Office, they could afford to give away the browser indefinitely. Netscape, by contrast, depended on browser revenues to survive and finance its research and development. On December 7th, 1995, at a press conference that many Netscape veterans remember as Pearl Harbor Day, Bill Gates announced that Internet Explorer would be free for all users, not just those on Windows 95, and that it would be deeply integrated into the operating system. The war wasn't fought only with prices and contracts, it was fought with code. Microsoft perfected a strategy that would become infamously known as embrace, extend, and extinguish. First, embrace. Microsoft entered the market by launching a browser, Internet Explorer 1.0 and 2.0, that complied with established HTML standards, thus gaining a foothold and credibility. Second, extend. Once a user base was established, Microsoft began implementing proprietary HTML tags and exclusive technologies like ActiveX and JScript, a variant of JavaScript incompatible with the standard. These features allowed developers to create more powerful websites, but ones that only worked correctly in Internet Explorer and Windows. Third, extinguish. As web developers adopted these extensions to take advantage of the new functionalities, websites stopped working in Netscape Navigator. The internet filled with buttons that said, "Best viewed with Internet Explorer." Users, frustrated by incompatibility, migrated en masse to IE, marginalizing Netscape to irrelevance. ActiveX technology was the spearhead of this strategy. Unlike Java applets, which ran in a secure sandbox to protect the operating system, ActiveX controls had full access to the Windows system. This allowed incredibly powerful functionality, like scanning local files or interacting with Office applications directly from the browser, fulfilling Gates's vision of total integration. However, this created massive security risks. A malicious website could use ActiveX to install viruses, delete files, or steal data without restrictions. Despite these risks, Microsoft pushed ActiveX aggressively because it was a technology that Netscape couldn't easily replicate without compromising its cross-platform architecture. ActiveX was the glue that tied the web to Windows. Java, the programming language from Sun Microsystems, was another existential threat. Its promise of write once, run anywhere meant developers could create complex applications that would work regardless of operating system, breaking Windows lock-in. Internal documents revealed in the trial showed that Microsoft deliberately attempted to undermine this portability. They created a Java implementation for Windows that included proprietary extensions. If a developer used these extensions, their Java program would only work on Windows, breaking the cross-platform promise. An internal Microsoft email established the explicit goal: kill cross-platform Java by growing the polluted Java market. Although Microsoft's external aggression was the determining factor, Netscape wasn't exempt from critical internal errors. The constant pressure to stay ahead of the Redmond giant led to a frenetic development culture that prioritized new features over stability and performance. With the launch of Netscape Communicator 4.0 in 1997, the product had suffered what in software engineering is called feature creep. It was no longer just an agile browser, it was a heavy suite that included email, web page editor, collaboration tools, and calendar. The software became slow, buggy, and consumed too much memory. alienating users just when Internet Explorer 4.0 reached technical parity and offered a faster, lighter experience. Netscape's most fatal error, however, was an engineering decision that has become a classic case study in software management. Faced with the code problems of version 4.0, technical leadership decided that the existing code was irreparable and opted to rewrite the browser from scratch for version 5.0. Joel Spolsky, former Microsoft programmer and influential commentator, called this decision the worst strategic mistake a software company can make. Rewriting the code from scratch consumed nearly 3 years, from 1998 to 2000. During this critical time, Netscape couldn't launch significant new versions or respond to Microsoft's innovations. While Netscape engineers were immersed in the architecture of the new code, Internet Explorer continued iterating and improving. By the time Netscape 6.0 finally launched in the year 2000, Microsoft had already conquered more than 80% of the market. Netscape had left the battlefield empty for 3 crucial years, allowing Microsoft to win by default. Financially weakened and losing market share at an alarming rate, Netscape sought an exit. On November 24, 1998, America Online announced the acquisition of Netscape for $4.2 billion in a stock exchange. Although the sale price seemed like a victory for shareholders, culturally and operationally it was the final nail in the coffin. AOL was a mass media company with a corporate culture radically different from Netscape's elite engineering. The merger provoked an immediate culture clash. Talented engineers, seeing their mission to change the world subordinated to AOL's content strategies and frustrated by bureaucracy, began a massive exodus. The Netscape browser languished within AOL, converted into a marketing tool for portal services, while Internet Explorer consolidated its global hegemony. Chapter 4. The Glass Box. While Netscape crumbled in the market, the United States Department of Justice, along with 20 state attorneys general, launched a legal offensive against Microsoft in 1998. The case, United States versus Microsoft Corporation, focused on demonstrating that the company had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by using its operating system monopoly to stifle competition in the browser market. The government's strategy, led by attorney David Boies, was brilliant in its execution. Instead of relying solely on abstract economic theories, Boies used Microsoft executives' own words against them, internal emails where they spoke of jihad, cutting off the air supply, and crushing the competition became the most damning evidence of the company's predatory intent. The most dramatic and damaging moment for Microsoft was the videotaped deposition of Bill Gates. During 3 days of interrogation, the richest man in the world, known for his sharp intellect, adopted an evasive, forgetful, and often combative posture. Gates claimed not to remember key events or emails dozens of times. He obsessively argued over the meaning of common words and denied having knowledge of strategies he himself had authorized in emails presented as evidence minutes later. His credibility evaporated before the eyes of Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson. The press and public watched as the tech genius was reduced to an uncooperative witness trapped in his own contradictions. Microsoft's central defense was that Internet Explorer wasn't a separate product but an integrated feature of Windows that benefited consumers by being free and improving the operating system experience. They argued that the government had no right to dictate how they should design their software. However, the government presented a devastating technical demonstration. Expert Edward Felton created a program that allowed removal of Internet Explorer from Windows 98 without affecting system stability, proving that the integration was an artificial business decision, not a technical necessity. Judge Jackson's ruling in November 1999 was forceful. Microsoft was a monopoly and had illegally abused its power. The judge ordered the most extreme measure possible, the breakup of Microsoft into 2 independent companies, Baby Bills, one for operating systems and another for applications. Although this breakup order was later overturned on appeal and replaced by a less severe settlement in 2001, the verdict of illegal monopolization stood, marking the company and changing its future behavior. In January 1998, in a moment of desperation facing market share loss, Netscape made a bold decision that would change technology history, releasing their browser's source code to the public. This project received the codename Mozilla. The idea was that the global community of developers could improve the browser faster than Netscape's internal team. Although initially seen as an act of surrender, throwing in the towel, this decision planted the seed of resistance. From the ashes of Netscape's code, and after years of hard rewriting, Firefox was born. During the dark years of 2001 to 2004, Internet Explorer 6 dominated the market with more than 95% share. Without competition, Microsoft stopped innovating, and IE6 became a security hole plagued with problems. The web stagnated, but in 2004, Mozilla launched Firefox 1.0. It was lightweight, secure, introduced tabbed browsing, and it respected open web standards. Firefox began recovering market share, demonstrating that Microsoft's dominance wasn't invincible. Its success forced Microsoft to restart IE development and paved the way for the later arrival of Google Chrome. The war between Microsoft and Netscape left deep scars but also vital lessons. The defeat of strategies like Blackbird and ActiveX ensured that the web remained a neutral platform not owned by any corporation. The trial against Microsoft established a legal precedent that, although it didn't destroy the company, moderated its aggressive behavior. Many analysts suggest this moderation allowed the emergence of Google and Facebook, since an unrestricted Microsoft might have crushed them in their infancy. The survival of Netscape's DNA through Mozilla demonstrated that the open source model is a viable and necessary defense against corporate hegemony. Today, although Netscape no longer exists as a company, its legacy lives on in every web page loaded in a free browser. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of the most consequential corporate battles in technology history. If you found this analysis valuable, remember, we publish new investigative content every Saturday, exploring the hidden mechanisms behind the events that shape our digital world. See you next week.